pathway into government and on reaching the agreements that they have announced today. The caretaker government will work conscientiously with them over the next 72 hours or so to ensure that the transition for them into government is as smooth as possible. Unfortunately, the agreements that we have seen today reveal that what they have been negotiating over the last 6 weeks is a very confused and contradictory grab bag of commitments that will ultimately take New Zealand backwards. They've decided to prioritise landlords over renters, prioritise the oil and gas industry over New Zealand's international reputation and environment. They've decided to prioritise the tobacco lobby over the health of all New Zealanders. These are just some of the confused and contradictory commitments and wrong priorities that we have seen from the agreement that has been released today. We've also seen that even before they go into government, our predictions before the election that their tax cuts simply didn't add up have of course proven to be true. By abandoning their plan to bring foreign home buyers back into the market, which wasn't going to add up anyway, they have revealed at least a $3 billion hole in their own tax plans, which the agreements that we've seen today are completely silent on how they are going to pay for that. Therefore, that most likely means additional borrowing in order to fund tax cuts. That means that inflation will stay higher for longer, interest rates will stay higher for longer, and ultimately New Zealanders will pay more than they're likely to benefit from in the tax cuts that the National Party are offering. My final observation would be it's good that Christopher Luxon is moving into a round office, given the circles that David Seymour and Winston Peters seem to be running around him, and no doubt will for the next 3 years. Happy to open up for questions. Jenna.
Looking at what the National Party has conceded in those agreements, things like changes around the treaty and how it's applied in legislation, things like the COVID inquiry and the definition of gender in sport that New Zealand First was not. Is this government going to be more divisive than ever?
I think what we're seeing are the seeds of some very divisive debates over the next few months and years. This is definitely going to be a government that is going to drive New Zealanders apart and lead to more polarisation of the country than we have seen to date.
Nicola Willis says that they're going to make up for the shortfall from the foreign buyers tax by essentially going into the government spending a little bit more, finding more excess. They're going to be looking at the school lunches program, as well as the fact that the free tertiary study is going to go from the third year instead of the first year. Do you think there's enough fat in the system for that all to play up?
Look, you could abolish the school lunches program completely and it would still be just a drop in the bucket in terms of paying for the big hole in their tax plan. The reality is they already committed to very, very significant reductions in government department expenditure. And now they're saying, oh, well, we think we can find more. At the same time, they're also making a whole lot of commitments to spend more money as well. There is no plan, there is no financial plan associated with what we've seen today, and there's a reason for that, because over the last 6 weeks they've come up with a whole lot of commitments and no idea how they're going to pay for them.
What does co-deputy Prime Minister job share arrangement that they've got going on?
It's interesting that they're proposing to abolish co-governance arrangements when they're putting one in place for the Deputy Prime Ministership.
And when you were watching that press conference play out, what did you think? My role as Leader of the Opposition, what did you think your next 3 years might look like when you're watching?
To be honest, I didn't watch it. I had a few other things on this morning. So I got a commentary on the press conference, but I think our role as opposition will be really threefold. One will be to make sure that we do a good job of holding the government to account. That means scrutinising what they are doing. The second is to be proactive, so to make sure we're offering up different ideas and better ideas. And then the third, of course, will be to make sure that we put ourselves in a position to win in 3 years' time.
Sorry, as the Leader of the Opposition, what's more important this morning than watching the formation of a new government that you're going to hold to account?
I had a few other things on.
Do you think David Seymour and Winston Peters will be able to work together? Do you think they'll be able to trust each other?
I guess their commentary on each other's negotiations over the last 6 weeks would mean that New Zealanders would be reasonable to doubt that.
The review of fair pay agreements and term for tax is supposed to be done by Christmas. Do you think that can happen, and are you gutted if that will happen?
I'm very disappointed that across the totality of the agreements that we've seen announced today, we've seen a real attack on workers. We've seen millionaires being prioritised over working New Zealanders, and their plans to repeal a whole variety of different provisions in our existing employment laws ultimately will help to drive wages down in New Zealand, leaving working New Zealanders worse off.
Agreements, and you see so much of Labour's initiatives, policies heading to scrapping. How do you, I suppose, address that, going into this phase?
Well, I guess that's the nature of democracy. Every 3 years New Zealanders vote on who they want to be the government. They voted for a change of government, and they're certainly going to be getting a change. I don't think New Zealanders necessarily voted for all of the commitments that have been entered into in the agreements that we've seen released today.
What does the transition to opposition leader look like for you now? Do you rock up into Chris Luxon's old office on Monday morning? You lose your security? Can you just talk through all of that?
So I've given approval for the move to happen this weekend ahead of the formal switchover on Monday, because it seems a bit ridiculous to not do it over the weekend when there'll be fewer people in the building. And so I guess Monday or Tuesday, depending on how long the move takes. So the building will be in flux for a period of sort of 48 to 72 hours while they move everybody's boxes. When we get the go-ahead, we'll be moving into Parliament House.
And that swearing-in ceremony on Monday, basically Christopher Luxon comes back as the Prime Minister at that point, and that's the point you officially are the opposition leader? Yeah,
that's right. So, it's actually not that different to the ceremony that took place earlier in the year when I became Prime Minister. I will go and resign the Prime Ministership, and will resign on behalf of the rest of the government as well. And then not long after that, Christopher Luxon and his ministers, his incoming ministers, will arrive at Government House to be sworn in.
Just lastly, in terms of security, there has been some security issues. You yourself have spoken, not in a lot of detail, but have mentioned having to up your own personal security. How are you feeling about that transition and, I guess, losing a lot of that?
Yeah, look, I'm fine, and generally I haven't commented on those matters publicly, because I generally don't think it's a good idea to do that, but I'm feeling fine and confident.
In terms of
Jessica.
That transition is set to happen on Monday, but in some ways has been kind of happening over the last 41 days as well. How are you feeling about handing that over? Have you got your head around it already, or are you still sort of going through?
Well, I guess I've had 6 weeks to get my head around that. It has been a frustrating time. So if anything, I'm kind of looking forward to being able to get stuck into the new job, which I haven't really been able to do for the last 6 weeks because I've still been having to do bits of the old job.
In terms of the deal that
This legislation repeal and the scrapping of the new vaping rules around current vape shops there can be. Does that go against what Christopher Luxon was saying leading into the election campaign?
Well, Christopher Luxon and the National Party were attacking us for being too slow to do more around vaping. Now they seem to be dialling the clock backwards at a very rapid rate, deregulating more the vaping industry, and potentially, and committing to deregulating the tobacco industry more than it has been as well. That's not putting the health and well-being of New Zealanders front and centre of the government's program.
in terms of the deal,
What do you think the implications will be of stripping mentions of treaty principles from legislation, changing government department names to English first, and also having the treaty referendum thing go to reverse reading? What do you think the implications of that will be on the country?
I think the incoming government's Te Reo Māori ban is a step backwards. I think Te Reo Māori is increasingly in day-to-day use by New Zealanders. That's not to say all New Zealanders necessarily are, fully up to speed with that. I myself will be, will confess that I've got a bit more work to do there. But I think we've been making progress on that. Other countries that have an Indigenous language have been taking steps towards better integrating that into day-to-day use, and I think that New Zealand going in the opposite direction is a step backwards. I think in terms of repealing the treaty provisions in legislation, let's see what that looks like, but I think there'll be a lot of unintended consequences. The other thing is that they're turning their back on what would be about 4 decades worth of jurisprudence, and the unintended legal consequences of that could be quite significant.
In terms of the deal itself,
there's a clause in the agreement between the National Party and New Zealand First Party. It says refocus the curriculum on academic achievement, not ideology, including the removal and replacement of the gender, sexuality and relationship education guidelines. So you spoke really passionately during the election. This is what you went into for, to support queer people, trans people. Are you surprised at the moderate that Nats would throw queer and trans kids under the bus like this?
I think schools should be welcoming and inclusive places. We should recognise the diversity of our young New Zealanders, and we should not make school a place where young New Zealanders feel they have to be something that they are not in order to fit in. I think the attacks that we're seeing on our gender diverse community by the incoming government are a real step backwards.
So how will you find it?
Look, I'm not going to set out all of our, our approach to opposition today, but we will certainly be a very vigorous opposition.
In terms of the deal itself, I mean, he's got 3 parties into a coalition. He's done it, he says, since the special votes in about 22 days. Do you not have to give him some credit for pulling off such a feat?
He can answer questions on that.
Do you expect some of your perhaps more senior Māori MPs to stick around, given the Treaty Principles Bill will be progressing through the legislative phase?
I'm sure that they'll have some very strong opinions on that, and I'm sure they'll be wanting to voice them.
And obviously, that Willie and Calvin did reference, that bill or potential for the referendum as a reason for them to stay longer. So, do you expect them to honour it?
I think the ongoing attacks on Māori that are, very prevalent throughout the documents that were released today, I think will be a source of huge concern to Māoridom in general, and I think our Māori members of Parliament will want to fight that very strongly.
Do you regret, I guess, the way that the Labour Party sold a lot of the reform in that area, and that you didn't take the public with you, and therefore now we have a situation where more is probably being unwound than you actually introduced?
This is certainly going backwards by 3 or 4 decades. It is going to turn progress back on Māori issues by a very, very long shot, including progress that was made under national governments that's now going to be undone. I note that they basically said that we shouldn't honour international agreements that we've signed up to, such as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that was signed up to by a national government. I think that's going to damage New Zealand's international reputation. Begs the question of, if you're signing up to an international agreement and then saying you don't recognise it, you're not going to honour it, what does that mean for the other international agreements that New Zealand enters into? What's that going to do for our international credibility? I think those are all fair questions. In terms of the question that you raised, I set out in 2 speeches that I did in the run-up to the general election some reflections on where we'd got to around the relationship between the Crown and Māori, and that does include the fact that I think we needed to better articulate what we were doing and why we were doing it.
Why do you think this coalition
Yeah.
climate change remains outside of cabinet? It's something that you guys also did inside of cabinet. Do you think that was a missed opportunity to bring them inside?
I think it seems a bit unusual that the Minister for Climate Change, being within the National Party, is not going to be in Cabinet. Now, the Minister for Climate Change has been outside of Cabinet for the last 6 years under both of our governments because the Minister concerned was not part of the Cabinet, not part of the parties that were in the Cabinet. I think it's an unusual decision.
Knowing the dynamics as we do and seeing the way that the 3 parties campaigned and how they negotiated, do you think this coalition government will go the distance, the full 3 years?
Like I said, I do wish them well. I don't agree with a lot of what is in the documentation here, but I do believe that New Zealanders deserve to have good government, and they have voted, and I respect the vote that has just taken place. And I wish the new government well. I think it's going to be very challenging for them, though, particularly when you see some of the contradictions in the documents released today.
You said that you would wait for the cabinet to unveil or decide your shadow cabinet. So can you give us a timeline on when that will be?
Early next week.
Do you think that 6.5% is actually going to get turned at being Deputy Prime Minister, or is it going to blow up?
I noticed they was saying that it wasn't a case of sharing turns at something. That's a form of share. Whether Winston Peters ever gives it up, who knows?
That's quite a...
Do you want to go?
No.
The 6.5% funding cuts are here to stay for public service on top of Labour's funding cuts and the consultant contractor spenders, but also legislation of 400 million. Is there going to be anything left in public service?
It is going to be incredibly challenging for them to cut as much out of the public services that they have committed to, particularly given all of the extra things they seem to be wanting the public service to do.
Do you think there's anywhere to find that loss of funding from foreign buyers, reintroducing that?
Look, I think the most likely scenario is that they will end up borrowing more in order to pay for their tax cuts. I'd suggest that they ask the Conservatives in the UK how that worked out for them.
What were you implying just a second ago when you said considering if Winston gives it up, do you not think he will? Do you think he's going to hold on to it?
Yeah, probably will.
So they're keeping Crown-Māori relationships out, but they're taking the treaty through the House. Do you think that they're kind of confused about what it is that they really want? The National Party are hedging their bets either way?
Look, who knows where the National Party's position on, Crown Māori relationship and Crown Māori issues is these days, because it's certainly not the position it was under the Key English government or the Bolger government before that.
Do you expect to make changes to your shadow cabinet based on who's been appointed to those ministerial roles?
I haven't actually
Stay the same.
haven't actually sort of finalised the lineup yet, so intending to have a few more conversations about that over the weekend.
One word to describe the new coalition government?
I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and not get into that just yet. Thanks. Cheers.
Is that a new shirt?
Then will you ever learn how to